Oh, hello there. Yeah, it's me, Jim, and I'm back with another book. So this is continuing the series of The Dark Tower. So this one is the third part, The Wastelands. So this was published in 1991. This edition that I've got is a very used copy from the year after, but still illustrated by Ned Dameron. So I'm going to pop up some illustrations as we go. I won't do all of them. But I'd like to talk a little bit about my copy first. So yeah, I got this for my birthday last year. And these are all used copies and they were all from eBay. This one was in relatively good condition, other than the fact that once I started reading it, the illustrations all started popping out. So it was rather like reading a deck of cards. Bloody annoying, actually. So they kept falling out. And it is quite a weighty book as well. As you may know, I've got quite weak wrists because I've got some wrist problems. So there's a bit of wrist fatigue reading this little bugger. But anyway, I'll talk about the story in a moment, what I thought of it. But first of all, it's the all-important sniff. So, if you'll just bear with me a little, let's go in right into the middle and take a hearty good sniff. Oh. I tell you what, for a book that's well over 30 years old, there's not a good deal of whiff about this one. Next to nothing. I'm going to say piece of dandelion seed head. Yeah, because it doesn't really smell of anything, which is quite remarkable considering its age. But there we are. Won't always get a definite note out of these books. Yeah, so there we are. Right, I'm going to pop the cover up. Let's just talk a little bit about the cover itself. Now, I don't think this looks like Roland at all, and the way I imagine him. So he's definitely got I don't know, like a male model from a catalogue kind of look about him. He's too clean cut, isn't he? That kind of bullet belt across his chest. No, it's too clean. His clothes are too clean. He's wearing jeans as well. Quite nice ones by the looks of it. This isn't the Roland I kind of picture in my mind. He's wearing that bloody thing around his neck as well. In the background we can see Eddie. Now this is probably a bit closer to the way I imagined Eddie, especially in a kind of 80s aesthetic, which is what they're still going on in the early 90s. What we don't see on this cover, of course, are Susanna and, of course, Jake, who makes a reappearance in this book. But we've got the Dark Tower in the background, brooding menacingly, larger than life. So, yeah, there we are. There's that cover. I may pop up some other covers later on, but I'm going to focus on some of the illustrations this time. Anyway, there we are. So, right, to be purely reductive here, if we, like I said before, if we consider the first book to be a kind of an extended prologue, and the second book, The Drawing of the Free, to be Roland gathering his party around him, the third book is where the quest really truly begins, or rather a quest with direction, shall we say. Very early on in the book, this diagram pops up. Roland draws it in the ground with a stick, and it describes I think there's 12 portals scattered around Midworld, and between each opposing portal there's what he describes as the beam. Now the beam transects, it passes between each of these portals, and in the dead centre of all of those is where the Dark Tower resides. So here we can see, I think, Stephen King's thought process, where it's being laid bare for us. You probably know or as I understand the way he works, he doesn't really plan much at all and just writes as he goes along. So we can see he's thinking, right, we better get the quest going here. I know Roland's been bimbling around Midworld for years and years in search of the Dark Tower, but this is the first time that direction has been imparted. So they've got something to follow. The beam. So the beam is you can't see it, but it's having an influence on the world around it. If you look up in the sky, the clouds are following its path. They're being bent around this beam. So yes, there we are. We have direction. We have a quest. So very early on in this book, we encounter one of these portals, basically. Now, there's a little bit of speculation as to where these portals lead. They might go to our world, they might go to other worlds, who knows. But each portal is guarded by a guardian. And they happen upon one of these guardians. Shardik, he's called. And it's a bloody great bear. Apparently an ancient creature that has unfortunately gone quite berserk. And so very early on in this first book, they have to kill this menacing bear that comes out to try and kill them all. This is done by Susanna in the end. So the thumbnail that I use for this video is really quite a powerful image, I think, of this is the moment where Susanna shoots the bear. So in the early parts of this book as well, Roland's training them to be gunslingers like himself. Upon killing this bear, they discover that it's actually a cyborg, which is quite interesting. Again, as there's that kind of jarring, anachronistic thing going on. So we've got ostensibly a world that's set in a feudal, medieval kind of period, I suppose you could say. But then we've also got these little glimmers of high technology. And this is a very blunt force trauma of a incidence of this, whereby they see the mechanics behind the flesh. So it's actually a blood and flesh creature, but inside a robotic skeleton. It's also been stamped by the maker, and there's a really interesting little, I might pop it up, little label of where it's been made, and I just love that kind of reference that instantly pulls you out of your comfort zone with what you've come to expect of this world. So yeah, that was a nice little moment early on. Going back to the way Stephen King possibly wrote this book, that another ingredient that he's playing with at the beginning is the paradox of Jake. So if you remember in the very first book, Jake was pulled from our world, 70s, I think it was 70s New York, and he was pulled into Midworld when he was pushed in front of a car and killed. He found himself in Roland's world. Roland took him under his wing, but at a certain point allowed Jake to die. In the second book, Roland is able to atone for this thing that he's always been guilty of, letting Jake die, and he manages to save Jake by preventing the man from pushing Jake Mort, he was called, this weird serial killer called the Pusher, and so he liked to push things off buildings and hit people in the head with bricks, something that happened to Susanna in the second book as well. And also Jake pushed Jake in front of a car and killed him. So by preventing that happening, two concurrent realities exist. There's the timeline where Jake died, and there's the timeline where he didn't die. Now, the consequences of this paradox is that very gradually, both Jake in 70s New York and Roland in Midworld training Eddie and Susanna in the ways of slinging guns, they start going mad because they can't accommodate these two things at the same time. Now, the only thing I would say about the beginning, the first, 2/5 of the book, maybe more, is devoted to this interplay between Jake and Roland. And what specifically Jake does to try to... The only way he knows how to stop this is to try to find a way into Roland's world, into Midworld. obviously there's no more portals. Those doors have been closed and they've long since been closed. So he's got to find a far more esoteric way of getting from this other world. And it's done in a very convoluted way that kind of lost me a little bit. I lost a bit of interest, I must say, earlier on. It involves a key. Now, I'm trying not to give away spoilers here. I know it's awkward because this is the third book in a series, so if you're watching this and you haven't read any of them, you probably won't be wanting to watch it at all. Not least, of course, because I'm rambling. But if you've already read it, then you already know, so I don't know how to balance it, but I'm not going to give away too much in terms of spoilers. But it involves a key. So Jake has a key in his world, and it's up to Eddie, as it transpires, to carve a facsimile of the key he will use out of wood in Midworld. And at the appointed time, they both have to turn their keys at the same time. So up to that point where Jake emerges, I was losing it a bit. I was losing interest, I would say. I was still interested in the journey and what might happen later, but it was losing me. But that all changed. As soon as Jake is in the mix and the quest party is complete, things get very interesting indeed. Now, I would say that for the first time ever, this has never ever happened to me reading, I actually started crying reading this book. So it's when shortly after Jake comes into the fold, so to speak, they happen to cross a very small town. I think it's called River Crossing. I think it's called that. And in this town, they encounter lots of people, but they're all ancient. They're very, very old people. A town entirely composed of old people. There's no young people at all. And so they spend some time there and talking about where they're going. Various things happen there. And the thing that got me was a passage where they're leaving the town behind. I think I'll read it. I wasn't going to read it. I don't think I'll be emotional reading it now. It just got me at the moment. I'll talk about why after I've read it. So this is Jake basically being upset that they're leaving all of these old people behind to fend for themselves. Obviously, Roland is hell-bent on finding this Dark Tower, so he's getting itchy feet already, so they're going to be leaving this town behind. Eddie put an arm around his shoulders. "Just keep walking, sport," he said in an unsteady voice. "That's the only way to do it." "They're so old," Jake sobbed. "How can we just leave them like this? It's not right." "It's Car," Eddie said without thinking. "Is it? Well, Car sucks." "Yeah, hard," Eddie agreed, but he kept walking. So did Jake, and he didn't look back again. He was afraid they would still be there, standing at the centre of their forgotten town, watching until Roland and his friends were out of view. And he would have been right. Yeah, so it's, for me, old people have they always affect me in a certain way. I used to work as an ambulance car driver, patient transport kind of thing, and I encountered lots of people towards the end of their lives suffering from various maladies, and I often found it upsetting that they appeared to me like children. You know, they were most of them were fully there mentally, but their bodies were just failing them. But they had such love for each other. You know, the ones that were still married and the friends of friends, and yeah, I just pictured that, and also my parents. You know, you're always thinking of things, the fragility of life, shall we say. But anyway, that just caught me off guard, and I was just reading it in bed beside my partner, and I just started crying. This never happened before. It's quite embarrassing. But I'm quite terrible. If I watch certain films, I'll just start crying. I could cry at an advert quite easily. But there we are. Yeah, so that was such a powerful moment. Anyway, the adventure continues and various other things happen. The larger part of the book is about this big city that they encounter, which is similar in many ways to New York. But it's a city that you very quickly understand is based on a city of far greater technological advance than 80s New York would have been, which was the most contemporary setting in these early Dark Tower books. But it's since been left to rack and ruin, and there's two opposing kind of sects or gangs, I suppose, and they're both at each other's throats. It's a very dangerous place indeed. And when the party reach this city, things go wrong. And that's where a lot of the tension comes in towards the end. The reason that they've the reason they've risked going to this city is all about a train, because this, as they keep explaining, the world has moved on. So Midworld is kind of being stretched, and this Dark Tower is thousands and thousands of miles away. So they want to try to cut that distance down, and they've heard from those ancient village dwellers that there was once a supersonic train that used to go to and from the city out into the wastelands beyond. So they're looking for that train. Interestingly, this train is a sinister thing, as they soon discover. But there's a parallel to this, because back in his own world, Jake was given he bought a children's storybook. It's called Charlie the Choo Choo, I think. I'll put a picture up. It's a very interesting illustration, because it really brought home to you the fact that this is a story for children, but with a very sinister kind of edge to it, exemplified by this illustration whereby the driver of the train kind of looks happy, but maybe also petrified by this train who's kind of sentient. So it's a kind of a Thomas the Tank Engine ripoff, I would say. And the children are either really happy or they're bloody crying their eyes out. This runs parallel to the existence of this train, sentient train that they're trying to find in Midworld, called Blaine the Pain, as he is known, also Blaine the Mono. And it's a sentient train, so it has an artificial intelligence, which they discover, this is a relatively big spoiler, it's gone quite berserk. It's utterly mad. And at the end, they're having to try to stop the train. Once they get on it, they're trying to stop the train from killing them. So there obviously is a parallel there with Hal from Space Odyssey. Although I would say the train's personality could have been slightly more sinister for me, because it kept doing these kind of impressions of characters from like old westerns like John Wayne and things like that. And I know there's a lot of blending between our reality and the reality in Midworld, but those felt quite jarring in that, for me, it felt jarring, let's put it that way. But there's some other interesting crossovers when they find relics of like Nazi Germany. So a crashed Nazi plane outside of the city, and various other references. Things get really interesting, I would say. So yeah, I'll probably leave it there. I'm sorry, it's always rambling, isn't it? But if you haven't read any of them, please start at the beginning and maybe only watch these after you've read them, perhaps, or not at all. What did you think? I know I got a comment on the last one. They said they didn't like the third one, but I kind of know what they mean in some ways, because it definitely slowed down for me at the beginning and I was struggling a little bit, but I was determined to keep going, and I was very glad that I did, because it was so bloody great towards the end. And of course it made me cry. I mean, I can't give a book that's made me cry anything less than 5 stars. I'm sorry, I can't. It would have been perhaps 4, just for the slower parts of it, but maybe... you know, things don't need to be barreling along at the same at a blistering speed every time. You do need lulls occasionally. It's just that I was getting a little too lulled, perhaps. But anyway, there we are. 5 out of 5. That's what I'm giving it. I'm having a bit of a break from now on. I'm going to read a few other books in between the next Dark Tower book, but I will be back to this series. Sorry, it's already gone on too long. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Cheerio.